Good afternoon, everyone. My name is DMRawlings, the 10-Minute DM. I am an experienced Forge in the Dark GM, and I am here to offer my advice 10 minutes at a time. So you may have noticed in Forge in the Dark games that there are no obvious mechanical differences between striking someone who's totally untrained and also striking a giant terrifying monster. These actions appear equally difficult because you have the same dice pool for each, and a 1 to 3 is a failure, a 4 to 5 is success at cost, and 6 is a success. But there are a number of indirect mechanics and tricks that you can use to make some actions feel more difficult to other. So let's talk about it. The first lever we have as a GM is whether or not to call for a roll at all. There are some things, like trying to punch open a bank vault, they're just never going to succeed. This is the equivalent of D&D's stereotypical convince the king to give you their kingdom kind of thing. We as GM have the authority to rule that any attempt will automatically fail, because the action is so incongruous with the fiction, because the character doesn't have the essential gear, because the action is so difficult it's unattainable. In Forge in the Dark games, these actions have zero effect. Effect, the mechanical term. In Candela Obscura, this is a situation where the expectations of the roll are that even on a success, you will not get what you want. The best possible outcome here is that the character fails, and there's no further bad stuff that happens. Often as GMs, we should suggest that they try something more effective instead. Maybe the character can use some gear to make the roll possible. Maybe there's a totally different approach that would succeed more often. There are rare times when a player thinks that doing an action that's unattainable fits their fiction. They're mad, so they punch the bank vault. In situations like that, let them roll, knowing that a 6 is you don't hurt yourself trying, right? So, I wanted to take a quick break here to talk about an exciting project that I am working on. Something I've noticed about Candela Obscura is that there are only 6 circle abilities, but for me, the circle is a huge part of your character's identity. That's why I've been working on a brand new unofficial supplement for Candela Obscura called Circles and Assets. This supplement adds 5 new circle types, like the Studious Archivists or the Adventurous Pioneers who delve Oldfarin runes. This adds 30 additional circle abilities to the game, giving you plenty of new options for your Candela Obscura campaigns. I'm going to be crowdfunding Circles and Assets, so if you're interested, click the link in the show notes and sign up for updates for when the campaign goes live. Now, back to it. Another lever you have as a GM is to add a condition to the roll. For example, you're going to need someone's help to do this. You're going to need a setup roll in order to succeed. Maybe that's something like some research or getting into a better position. By adding one or more conditions before the roll, you're requiring the characters to go through more steps before they can succeed. For instance, by requiring someone's help, you're making the group spend resources to even try to do this, and you're increasing the risk of the action roll in general, because remember, when you get aid from an ally, they are also subject to any consequences or bad stuff that occurs in the roll. So what is a setup roll? A setup roll is an action roll used to set up a more useful second action. And I'm sorry, that's a little tautological, but here's some examples. You pry off an armored plate from a monster, revealing the soft area underneath. You create a distraction, making it easier for an ally to sneak past the guards. You bribe an official, opening them up to the possibility of considering your interesting idea. You spend time calculating an escape route, helping you flee later. Treat these like any other roll, except that when you succeed, it's altering the possibilities of what can happen on the next one. You are setting things up. Literally, making one roll to make the second either more successful, less dangerous, or possible in the first place. Using a setup roll doubles the possibility of failure or success at cost. As a GM, when you get complications, then you can throw off the character's plans. You can make these plans more dangerous to complete, or you can force new approaches and make these players think on the fly a little bit about how they're going to get past it. So how do we use setup rolls in a game? Well, we can call for a setup roll when the player wants an outcome that's just too extreme for one. For instance, if a player wanted to track down a rare flower, have them make a setup research roll to understand where it might bloom. Or to pick the pockets of a senior official, maybe have a setup roll that's perception based to have them wait for a time when that officer is distracted. As a GM, it's usually best practice to present a setup roll as an additional complication. You want to find this flower, but don't know enough about it to start looking. You want to pickpocket, but the officer has guards. How do you get close? And it's also very possible that players may suggest that they do a setup roll in order to make a further outcome more likely as well, in which cases you might be changing the position or the effect, or in Candela, you might be changing the stakes on a roll based on the result of the first. Ultimately, this is a tool that allows for more complex things to get broken out further. But when there are even more complex tasks, the natural extension of a setup roll is to use clocks, or in the case of Candela Obscura, it's countdown dice, to break difficult things into several possible rolls. I'm not going to go too deeply into clocks, since I've already covered them in another video, which I will link up there, I think. But let's talk briefly about using them. This is going to be a progress clock, and as players take relevant actions, the clock is going to start filling. When the clock fills completely up, or the countdown die gets down to 0, then the players get what they want. So when a player asks for an outcome that's too difficult to be solved in one roll, we want to create that clock, we want to give it a name, we want to ask the player for how they want to start achieving that goal. You might suggest an initial lesser obstacle to help guide the player, but the goal is to make each step of the process feel natural according to the fiction. Both the GM and player are working together to achieve this. Each step feels meaningfully different, as in the fiction is changing from roll to roll, it's not just 3 lockpicking rolls. Each step draws on slightly different expertise, so it allows other people to maybe participate in doing this. And ultimately, you want to try to finish the clock mechanically when the problem is solved fictionally. So you're aligning that moment of success with when the clock mechanically finishes. For instance, if you were trying to bypass an arcane lock, the first challenge might be figuring out how to interface with the lock at all. The second challenge might be feeling the arcane fluctuations like tumblers in a physical lock. And the third challenge might be finding the solution to that lock. So just like setup rolls before, use complications to increase the stakes of a scene. Introduce roving guards, maybe a danger clock, broken tools, etc. to disrupt the action and make the story more compelling. Alright, I hope this gives some insight into how to handle higher difficulty challenges in Forged in the Dark games. There may not be a target number that you can alter, but there are a bunch of ways that you can make challenges more difficult. If you've learned something today, maybe press the subscribe button so you can get more of this content. This has been DMRawlings, the 10-Minute DM, signing off.